Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the second in our series of senior living webinars. My name is Paul McDevitt and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Unity Connected Solutions. Today's topic and focus is on fire safety, and I should really stretch that out to emergency preparedness. And I have with me today Chris Prada, Regional Manager with Status Solutions. Morning, Chris.
Morning, all.
And I have Amanda Miller-Lau, our Senior Living Specialist at Unity Connected Solutions. Morning, Amanda.
Good morning.
Between them, they have experience of working with several hundred senior living facilities across Canada, and both public and private. And these can be from large organizations to single facilities. And one thing they all have in common is a need for better emergency preparedness. So I'm going to throw the first question out to Chris. Chris, what's the urgency right now around fire safety, specifically for senior living?
Okay, thanks, by the way, for having me on today. As far as the fire safety, there's been some recent changes in the fire codes. I've been meeting with fire marshals across Ontario and have had seminars with 40 plus of them. And the message that I've gotten has been very clear. By the end of this year, the new regulations are going to be enforced. They've come out some time ago, but now the fire marshals are getting aggressive, going into the homes. And the primary change has been the speed and response. So how do we improve response times is where the issues are all about. And technology can be that solution. And that's really what we're going to be talking about a bit today.
Thanks, Chris. Amanda, perhaps you can talk to some of the challenges that you've seen in how senior living facilities are handling emergencies.
Well, everybody has an emergency plan in place. Traditionally, a smoke detector will go off and a person will run to the fire panel. So no matter where they are, they have to run to the fire panel. The fire panel may be located in a basement, or it may be located in a separate room or at the front door, not necessarily in the most convenient places. So this sometimes slows down the emergency plan that's in place. Traditionally, you look at the fire panel and you see what has gone off, what room it is, or the location of the zone. So if residents require help because there is a fire, it slows down the process by going there. It also gives false positives. So if somebody is in their suite and they burnt toast and the fire smoke detector goes off, it could be a false positive and the emergency plan may go into place when it's not needed. So there's a variety of different things that facilities have challenges on.
And I guess just recently, I mean, one of the things that was apparent is that the speed with which people respond to emergencies can definitely dictate the outcome in the end.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially where you have residents that need a significant amount of help to evacuate the building. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons for the focus of the fire safety regulations.
And actually, that is the actual reason that the code was changed. There was some unfortunate situations where, because of speed and response, there was loss of life. So anything that speeds up response, whether it is putting up sprinkler systems, whether it's putting addressable smoke detectors, they're all geared towards response time. But the one piece being missed is how do we speed the event of the technology?
Right.
And that is what we're going to talk a bit about today.
And I guess another element that just to talk about that is that even any company that I've worked at, they have fire drills, fire emergencies. The challenge is if you do too many of those, people just think everything is a drill and it never really sinks in. On the other hand, real-world emergencies never follow the conditions that a drill is in, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Chris, on that point, maybe we can look at, how can technology help then in improving that response?
Absolutely. So this is a really good question, and Amanda alluded to some of this. But let's talk about it first from a very high level. First, this is often, action is driven by the fire marshal doing an inspection, somebody getting a fail or a warning, and the knee-jerk reaction is to go back to whoever put the fire panel in and say, what do I do? But basically all you're doing is enhancing what already has the limitation. The alerting piece is still in the basement. The alerting piece is still at the front door or wherever it's located. We can change that. Take the events, take those events that are currently on the panel and move it directly into the first responder's hands. So the moment there's an event, your staff knows where the event is and what appropriate action to take. We've automated the process, so thereby eliminating human error, eliminating the delays in someone getting to that device. So first piece, integration to fire panels, allowing escalation directly to the responders. Secondly, to address these solutions often require recabling of the building, require interruptions, require delays. This type of technology works with the existing infrastructure. It is wireless and therefore can be deployed quickly without interruption to residents or staff. The next big piece is being able to layer in rules, escalation, and mass notification, so that when an event occurs, the rules are already in place. The plans that you already have are now automatically executed rather than relying on human intervention. The next step to being able to push messages out to everybody, again, layered into the same technology, which means lower cost, faster deployment, and ultimately speeds response times.
And I think the key one in there that you mentioned was building in escalations, because one of the challenges today for any senior living facility, I mean, your staff could be engaged in helping a sick resident, they could be on a different floor for some other reason, and I guess the notion that if your first responder doesn't, how long do you wait, right?
Right.
How long do we determine that that person hasn't, I mean, the alarm is probably still going off, but do I know if somebody else is responding or not?
Exactly, and that's part of the problem when it's a real emergency. You can plan for anything, you can run drills, but when there's a real emergency, things go wrong.
Right.
And this is where automation and building in rules that execute automatically really make a difference in response time and protecting people's lives.
So I can build a known escalation time.
Exactly.
So if someone doesn't respond in, say, 30 seconds.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you can build rules based on the resident. So somebody that's fully independent can have different rules as opposed to an area in the building where people are more restricted, physically, mentally, or otherwise.
Oh, because there are quite a few senior living facilities today that were independent only that are starting to add, assisted living floors. So you could have a different escalation
For every level.
Oh.
And that's a really good point. This is one of the rules that the fire marshals have stressed. Because of the changing demographics, homes that previously didn't have to meet these response times are now being forced to meet the response time. And the guideline is somewhat fuzzy as to when you fall into what category. But if you have somebody that needs help, you're going to have a hard time.
And we're seeing a lot of these residences now, not converting, but certainly adding in an assisted living area so that the residents who've already has become their home don't have to leave because they now need some assistance, right?
Absolutely. Aging in place.
So it's going to be, this issue of fire safety is going to expand to locations that previously didn't have to necessarily
Absolutely.
follow.
Yes.
Interesting. So one of the issues you just raised was this notion of fire panels and some of the limitations they have. Are there ways that they can be supplemented then as well?
Absolutely. So regardless of the type of panel you have, I mean, basically you may or may not have addressable smoke detectors in the units, being able to give you exact locations. Some do, some don't. Some are giving zone only. But regardless of what you have, you can tie into any and all of them to enhance the operation. So you have a fully addressable smoke detector. It's the very best you can have today. You still have issues because the smoke detectors are going to have different alerting levels based on what happened. Amanda earlier mentioned somebody burning toast and rolling fire trucks. Well, you don't want that to happen. So often the fire panels are programmed with two-stage. Smoke detector goes off in the unit. Don't roll a truck. Do something else first. The problem is that do something else first, it might not have been toast. It might have been actually a real fire.
Mm-hmm.
So integration to something like a modern fire detector can still prevent issues that would be missed by the panel. We'll talk to that a little bit more when we see some case studies. Secondly, with existing fire panels, you've met all the rules, but you now need to do addressable in the unit. We can tie in to your existing device, either augmenting it with a fully wireless smoke detector or tying into your existing devices. But the key is, whether you have a new or old fire panel, we're moving the information off the panel and into the responder's hands. We're taking the events and creating escalation to manage it appropriately.
So thanks, Chris. So then that means that there's much more emphasis perhaps then on the smoke detectors as well, and what the different kind of options we might have as when it comes to smoke detectors. Is that something you could help us with walking through, Amanda?
Sure. So you'll see here there is fully wireless smoke detectors that you can put into one of your suites, and there's no wire required for this. We can take your existing smoke detector and put a universal transmitter on it, which connects to a detector would be, so you're able to supplement there. And then the other choice is having a transmitter as well, a partial wireless detector and the smoke detector. So you can do multiple rooms within a suite with one transmitter. So if you already have your smoke detectors in a 2-bedroom suite, for example, and there's one near the lobby area of the suite, we can put a transmitter in there and have it work that way as well.
So we talked a bit about the fact that one of the best ways to get across how these things might work, because everybody's situation is slightly different, everybody's facilities are a little different, and they have different levels of technology already in place, so some may need more work than others. So let's walk through 2 or 3 scenarios perhaps that just might help to explain to people better what's going on. The first one is one that you're going to walk through, Amanda, is that right?
Yeah, so we have a long-term care home that needed to do a quicker evacuation. So what we did is we put in escalations where, in order to evacuate quicker. So it's a large home, so the amount of people on staff at one time wouldn't be enough staff to get everybody out of the building.
It's a campus environment, really.
It is a campus environment. The long-term care home is the most needed to evacuate. So what we're able to do there is put in a protocol and evacuation procedure. So not only do the people who are on the site get notified to start evacuating everybody, they start pulling in people who work at the home, at the long-term care home, and live close by, because they're going to need more people to help evacuate as well. So that is how they set up their emergency response in order to make sure that everybody in need can get out in a timely manner.
Thanks. And then the second one, where the fire panel wasn't enough, as we put it here, that's one that you can talk to, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. This one's an interesting case in that there was a press release put out on it, because ultimately, by being integrated to the fire panel, we ended up avoiding or preventing an actual fire. The situation in this case was that the fire panel was addressable. It did have smoke detectors throughout the building, and a unit detected a fire. But again, because it's a 2-stage fire panel and you don't want to roll a fire truck because somebody burns toast, the fire panel, though triggering on the event, didn't escalate it. And normally, the staff would not see it until somebody actually went to the fire panel. With the integration, the caregiver on their mobile device saw the alert, saw the apartment, went up to the apartment and found that a resident had left a pot on the stove. The pot had actually melted, and you had molten metal dripping onto the floor. It was an imminent fire about to take place. The other interesting thing about this was that the integration had only happened 4 weeks prior. Ultimately, what could have been a disaster was avoided. Even though the fire panel worked appropriately, even though it did trigger the alarm, it simply did not roll fire trucks, and nobody was responding. It was because someone having integration, it was escalated to a caregiver who actually went into the room and saw the event. I always like to throw something in here, and I know that it was not sort of thought through, but I always like to tell a story about what happened with my family. My grandfather smoked for 55 years, moved into a home, and ultimately never stopped smoking until the day he fell asleep in bed with a cigarette and set the bed on fire, ultimately leveling that senior home. This is back 30 years ago. The point being is a cigarette didn't trigger the fire panel. With our devices and with our sensors, we could have detected that cigarette. We could have prevented a fire, because current fire solutions detect after there's a fire, not in the prevention mode. So just a couple of stories as to real case world prevention that we could address.
I have a question, and I'm going to throw it out at you right now, Chris, and hopefully we can answer it or not. We can take it offline with the person later. But they actually asked me a question about the fire panel, and asking that, you know, some have diagnostic information that get published through an RS-232 port, right?
Right.
And is there a way to filter and do different things with them? For example, some which are not actually related to emergencies. Can I filter them out and say, send that to my maintenance staff to go check out what needs checking out? But if it's obviously a true an alert, that we pass it off to the care teams to take care of.
That's a fantastic question, and that is exactly part of the point. We can plug into that output of the fire panel. The fire panels put out a lot of information. Certain events are acted on, others are not. But once we're integrated to that port, we can build a rule against every output. So there's certain outputs you want maintenance staff to take actions. You have certain outputs you want PSWs to take action. You have certain events that maybe you want to escalate to the GM or even call 911 services, whatever. You can build a rule off of every diagnostic that's coming out of the fire panel, regardless of whether it's through a serial port, a printer port, being parallel, or an IP port. You can tie into any and all of them. So great question. That's a great question.
Excellent, yeah. Well, the last one on here was cost effectively implementing smoke detection, and this was actually a client, and they're a downtown organization. They're a multi-story building, and the fire panel actually is down in the lobby area, but no one's actually down in the lobby area, and they needed to update their smoke detection. But they're one of these buildings that have 2 bedrooms and in a vestibule, and of course one of the things that the fire marshals are pushing for now is that the bedrooms and the vestibule, even though it's just big enough for, you know, a doorway into 2 other doorways, had to also be independently set up with a smoke detector. So significantly expanding the cost of putting in new smoke detectors into this building. So what was done there was that this particular client found these smoke detectors that will communicate with each other. So they're not wireless in the sense that they're going to, you know, send all the way back down to a centralized control unit, but they will communicate with each other. And then, so we had bedroom A and bedroom B talk to the vestibule, and we put in a universal transmitter in the vestibule, which meant that that would then send a signal, an alert to the vestibule. So because clearly the client's going to, if they did have to get someone out, they were going to have to get both people out anyway from both bedrooms. But at least that way they knew which pair of bedrooms was actually in need of support, and it was a much more cost-effective solution than having to, say, implement 600 smoke detectors. They were down to maybe 350, so the cost of their solution was reduced. So there are ways of implementing these solutions much more cost-effectively. But at the end of the day, they ended up with a system that was a far better smoke detection system, and then, of course, now they can use it for other purposes as well in that building. So, but they are pushing. The interesting thing is that it's not the first time we've seen where fire marshals now are saying certain rooms which people didn't think in the past had to be set up with smoke detectors were now being asked to. So the alternative for them was actually wiring in additional detectors, and if they had to wire them in, this building didn't have full ceilings. It was going to be conduit and an incredibly significant expense. So that was, a brief. There are actually many other examples we can provide, but the goal of this session is not to go on too long, and definitely, stretch out the talk. We could definitely talk to people one-on-one if they want to go into more scenarios that are similar. Perhaps now it may be a point to say it may not be quite clear. Well, how can something like a SARAS system, which can integrate with fire panels, it can support smoke detectors, it can escalate, how is it set up? What is the architecture? What is it does that can actually let it do this, and do this in a different way than perhaps people are thinking about? Because it is a fairly unique architecture.
Absolutely. So I think one of the points that is difficult to understand when we're talking here, we're talking about fire safety in this seminar, and we've focused on that aspect of the solution. But this is not a solution that you purchase just for fire safety. It is a very small component of the solution. The SARAS system is an alert server. Its intent is to provide awareness of every major event within the facility. So it can be your standalone emergency notification for pull cords in bedrooms and bathrooms, for mobile duress. It is a nurse call system. It is an integration to the fire panels and improving fire response. It manages not only life safety, but security issues and environmental issues and mass notification. So when we look at this, fire safety is often the driving factor that's going to have people take action today. But going beyond that, we can now provide mobile duress for residents. So taking a look at this diagram, at the center of the screen, you see the SARAS server. So what you're ultimately purchasing is a server, a purpose-built server with software intended to monitor all of the critical events within the facility. So if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, you will see what we call the alarms. So coming off of the fire panel, all of those events, we call them alarms. But you may also have bedside pull cords, which are also available on the SARAS system that are wireless. So a resident in their bed pulls a pull cord or pushes a plunger button. It is an event, and the SARA will respond to that. We have mobile duress buttons. So those mobile residents can have a device with them at all times. They're out in the garden, they have a slip and fall. We can identify who the person is and where they're located. We can provide motion sensors and door sensors and window sensors and bed exit sensors, whole host of wireless devices to protect your residents. We even have wheelchair sensors for those residents in wheelchairs. I don't know if people recall the unfortunate event last winter where a gentleman fell out of his wheelchair, went outside to get his newspaper, and unfortunately froze to death. The sensor in the wheelchair will identify if somebody falls out of the wheelchair and identify where the person is. So you're not just buying fire safety, you're buying a platform that can address all life safety, all security, all environmental issues, and then create the alerts. So you look at the alarms coming into the server. The server has the rules and escalation, and then it pushes out, based on that, what we call alerts on the right-hand side of the screen. So an event occurs, we can send that event to cell phones, to wireless phones, to pagers, to text messages, overhead speakers, any communication source necessary, and escalate it. So maybe it's an evacuation. I might have a series of events. I want to escalate to certain people based on critical events. So alert local staff, alert residents, and then alert the entire population related to the facility. So, quick overview, you're buying a server that can integrate to your fire panel, provide a host of wireless devices to protect your residents. Those events, through rules you build in, will then be pushed out to alerts to any and all communication devices you might be using for the facility. So I think that's as far as we can go on this particular webinar. I mean, we're going to have some other series, and I'll take that back to you, Paul, to talk about when we'll talk about.
Yeah, because the idea is not to spend so much time on this one here. So we had another question that came in, and I think it's worth addressing because I think it gets to the root of some of the things we just talked about. And the question was essentially, are we suggesting the smoke detector already in a resident room that is wired to the main fire panel is not enough, right? And we're not saying, these are bad things. We're talking about something improving response time, right?
So I'm not suggesting it's a bad thing. It's a great thing if you have it already, because that is ultimately where the homes are going to end up. If you already have the infrastructure, you already have the equipment wired, that's fantastic. What we're saying is that we can take even that scenario a step further. So the alarm goes off, the fire panel is going to pick it up, it's going to have the rules. You're halfway there, but the event is still sitting on the fire panel. That panel may not be in the most convenient place. Also, the rules and the escalation and the ability to push that alert out to smartphones, to tablets, to PCs, to text messaging, to wireless phones,
to the pager,
to the overhead paging system. The panel does not have those abilities, and it does not automate those processes. So if you already have it, that's fantastic. We can still speed up response times. Response times meaning the event occurs, the moment the panel knows, your staff knows, not just the person going to the panel.
And it could be more than one person, right, that gets alerted. I mean,
Could be the entire building.
We're saying a person, but in fact it can be any number of people that you determine, right?
Yes, and it could even be residents if you wanted to. There is no limit to how you push out those alerts.
And if the person that, one of the responders doesn't acknowledge, I guess that's what we talk about escalation. Really, the system actually looks for an acknowledgement, right? That says the alert has been received and someone is actually taking care of it. Because part of it is, do you know that someone is actually addressing that particular alarm? We actually can track that someone acknowledges
and responds,
right?
I think another big piece here is that issue as related to what to do when an event goes off. Depending on the area in the building and the way the facility is built, in some cases, the action is evacuate. In some cases, the action is stay in place. And sometimes that's difficult to communicate, whereby building that rule into the SARA, the system can see where the alert is and know which responders to be told evacuate and which responders to be told stay in place, because they're in an area of a building or there is certain vulnerabilities because of physical or mental challenges, that the better step is stay in place rather than evacuate. Those kinds of nuances a panel cannot do. We can build that rule in though. So regardless of how sophisticated the event is, the missing piece is the rules as related to the residents you have. And that is where an alert server can address.
And we're talking about one specific type of activity or event here, which is fire, smoke detection, but this can apply then to any and all activities, and even something simple like monitoring environmental issues like medical refrigerators, all the way up to something as serious as a fire. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we promised that we would keep these to 30 minutes, everybody, so hopefully that's answered the questions, and thank you for those people who have actually sent us in the questions that we've read out to you. And if there's others, please feel free to reach out, because we'd be more than happy to address them. As mentioned earlier, this is the second in a set of webinars that we're doing on different topics that are pertinent to senior living. Today we did fire safety. Upcoming in 2 weeks we have mobility for residents. We'll be sending out emails for people to register for that. July the 7th we'll be looking at mass notification, which kind of touches upon some of the things we talked about today, but there are specific things that we can do beyond just things like fire safety, and that may be could be other emergency type situations to do with weather or whatever, that mass notification can be important. Environmental monitoring, I just talked about that briefly. And then finally, things like security through access control and cameras perhaps. So please look out for upcoming requests to register for those events. We will be sending out a link to a page where you'll be able to get the recordings. We will post them there if you want to go back to them, or you have other people that want to go back to them. Feel free to send them that link. So once again, thank you for for spending that half an hour with us to look at fire safety. A big thank you from Unity and from Status Solutions. Goodbye.